Hello, this is Jeff Neville with Selective Imagery. The video for today is titled Effects of Natural Light in Bird Photography. Now, this video was inspired to me by a statement made by a fellow photographer who commented how hard it is to get good bird shots due to lighting conditions. Let's just say that photography is thought of, bird photography anyway, is thought of by many to be one of the hardest disciplines in photography. Now, one can argue about that because, I personally feel that all the disciplines have their own nuances and quirks and difficulties that require an exceptional skill set for those who choose to make a living in those other genres. But regarding bird photography, some of the reasons it's considered so difficult are as follows. We're going to say item number one is, since you're photographing outdoors most of the time, you're exposed to varying weather conditions: rain, snow, sleet, rain, changing winds. It makes it difficult more often than not. Second thing is dramatic lighting changes. It just seems to occur in an instant sometimes, depending on the time of day and the cloud cover or lack thereof. Number three, subjects of various colors, anywhere from 95% white to 95% black to everything in between. You have slow birds, you have fast birds, you have wading birds, you have diving birds, shore birds, birds of prey, etc., etc., etc. Number four, your subjects, you can't pose them and control the lighting in any manner. Unlike someone doing outdoor portrait photography, where you can move the subject to change the angle, move them into open shade, use strobes or diffusion panels, and change their location, and to make it so that you get that perfect image. With bird photography, you're going to get whatever nature throws at you, and you have to deal with it. And sometimes you're going to get good results, and sometimes today you may get the subject that you want, but the lighting wasn't good enough, and you get home and you look at everything and you just say, wow, I just kind of wasted a day. And that's just the way it goes. Because the only adjustments you could really make ahead of time, or when you show up at the site, is your initial white balance settings. Do you want to use auto? Do you want to use shade or cloudy or what have you? And you can adjust some of the presets like vibrance and saturation and sharpness and things of that nature if you're shooting JPEG files. If you're shooting RAW, then obviously you have to do most of the tweaking afterwards when you get home and you import the files into your computer. And depending on how well you are good with the software, it could be the difference between a whole bunch of garbage shots and a handful of wall hangers, which is what you're trying to get. Now, when I'm talking about making adjustments with the files when you get home, I'm not talking about excessive Photoshop enhancements. I'm talking about changes using your highlight, contrast, black and white sliders primarily, and maybe a temperature adjustment for your white balance. Now, other adjustments such as your vibrance, your saturation and clarity are really to one's personal taste, and you're going to have to adjust those as needed, especially if you're shooting RAW, unless you've created your own preset or have purchased presets from one of the hundreds of photographers out there that sell preset packs that give you the result you want, hopefully. Fifth thing is, usually if I'm shooting birds, if I'm very familiar with the area, I still try to show up at least 30 minutes before the sunrise to check out certain areas, see what is in certain locations, and decide where I want to start my shoot. It may be to catch a sunrise on the beach, then go get some shorebirds, then move on to marsh areas and ponds. Number 6, when you have a clear day, you have really hard light, which means you have bright highlights and intense shadows. So if the sunrise is at 6:30 a.m., I may not be shooting past 9:30 a.m. unless there are shaded areas I can go to, and maybe I can extend my time for another hour. If I shoot in the PM, I may start 2 hours before the sun sets and a couple hours afterwards. And if you're doing sunsets, obviously sometimes the best colors are an hour or so after the sun goes down. So you just don't want to sit there and just catch the sun going down once it's below the horizon. Lots of times you get some fantastic colors that go up into the clouds and are even better than when the sun was showing. So don't cut yourself short on that. And if you're shooting at high noon, basically forget it. It's just not worth it. Now, number 7 for me is side lighting. I sometimes call it rim lighting. It's when you can illuminate the edges of your subject in a brighter light, and you're going to have a lot of shadow area on the rest of the subject, which can be very dramatic, especially on a white bird like a snowy egret or a great egret. Backlighting can be dramatic with a halo effect when the light's behind the subject and you have a lot of pronounced shadows. Number 9, in Myrtle Beach, the skies have a lot to do with how well your pictures are going to come out. Lots of times you have no color in the sky at all, and that's going to be a tough day. It's going to be really harsh light, so harsh in fact that you might only be able to take the white birds like the first hour after sunrise, and then after that they're going to be completely blown out and not recoverable, and you're going to have to switch the birds that have, different, that are black birds or different colored birds. So I usually don't get more than an hour out of that. Now, if you have a blue sky with no clouds, that's better, although a lot of people don't like pictures of birds against a blue background. They think it's boring, but it's a minimalist photo. I mean, you're focused on the bird at that point, and I don't have a problem with that. But obviously you want to get some birds that are flying lower. You can capture the backgrounds that they live in, the environment that they live in, and those are great shots as well. If you're lucky enough to get a blue sky with white fluffy clouds, that's the best. You're going to have a banner day if you have that, which we don't get a lot down here. If you get the dark gray clouds, then you're really going to have a lot of pictures there's not a lot of contrast, there's not a lot of pop. You're not going to illuminate the eyes on the birds very well at all. And, you're going to get some okay shots, but you're not going to get too many that you're going to hang on the wall. And let's see, what else we got? Well, you want to also try to get, if you're lucky enough, you get catch light in the bird's eye with natural light. That's really cool. I mean, some people make a lot of money taking pictures of birds in pre-configured setups in their backyards with sticks hanging off feeders and using flash units and stuff like that, and they get the catch light in the eye all the time, and they make a lot of money doing that. Maybe that's my problem. I don't use the flash. I don't like to startle the bird, so I guess that's why I'm not making any money. In the video, I'm going to show you some images, talk about the challenges with each image, talk about what I may have done to make some adjustments with the image. But basically, more often than not, you are going to have to make tweaks in your software when you get home. And how far you go with it, you're an artist. Everybody's different. You have your own style, and there's nothing wrong with that. You have to make yourself happy first. So let's move on to the video. This is an early morning shot. The evening was cold, and as the sun rose, the fog floats over the water. Sometimes a tricky shot, but most modern cameras have no issues. If having problems, bracket your images as required. Another early shot, as the ripples in the water pick up the yellow light from the sun. Here you just want to adjust your exposure to get the water so it has color, not too dark, and picks up the kiss of sunlight. Here are some snowy egrets, easy to overexpose, the highlights, so be careful. Better to underexpose slightly and adjust as required afterwards with software. In this shot, you have the clear area of water with the green algae and plant life and a darker area of water. Make sure you don't overexpose the clear portion of the water. You can adjust the luminance of the green later in software. With this image, you have a very white bird and a very dark water. This is a toss-up. I decided to warm up the image slightly with white balance, which lightened the water slightly. If you try to lighten up the water too much with the black slider or shadows, you can end up with a weird color and the bird being white gets affected. Somewhat of a pain to process. In this image, it's obviously on the warm side, which reflects what I saw. A slight bump in shadows was about all I did. In hindsight, should have brushed the highlighted areas on the tree to the left and knock it down a bit more. Here I bumped up the shadows in black so it's not completely dark in the background, while knocking down the highlights a bit on the log the turtles are on. This shot is always a problem when you have dark water with birds that are half dark and half white. Adjust the black slider so the water glistens a bit with the color, and adjust the shadows and highlights as needed to get a reasonable exposure on the birds. Here you might say, what's the problem? It's the rocks reflecting the light and being overexposed. Obviously, knock down the highlights and bring up the shadows if needed on the mink. I always adjust my white and black sliders first on every photo. Not much here, perfect shot. Just kidding. Add a little saturation to bring out the pink. Make sure the sky is not too dark and lower the luminance on the green. Here the hardest part is capturing the bird 1/4000th of a second or faster, shot wide open to blur the background as best as possible. Knock down the highlights, but not to the point you lose the iridescent of the bird. Thank you, white clouds, to break up the blue sky. Make sure the bird is not blown out. Here it's a matter of how bright you want the image. I tend to like slightly underexposed images to bring out the color, but adjust to suit your taste. In this shot, you may have to increase exposure on the birds and adjust the saturation / luminosity of the green to suit your tastes. Here you have to decide how much you want to worry about the color of the water. I focused on having a strong foreground element to minimize the importance of the water. The color is how it was. Here I shoot wide open and let the background dark, as it added no value. This way you are drawn to the white bird. In this oyster catcher shot, I left the angle of the bank and just had to deal with a bright ocean. Left it bright but not blown out. Here the areas of concern are blown out highlights of the nest and the blue sky. Allowed greenery to intrude partway into the photo to break up the sky and dial down the highlights so the branches are not blown out. These are the tough shots, shooting birds and trees. If you are a couple hours after sunrise, many times the tree branches are overexposed to the point you may have to use the brush tool to lower the exposure in those areas. Also, at times you may be backlit and the branches have too many gaps and you get overexposed sky showing through. Try repositioning yourself to reduce the sky's influence if possible, and use the highlight and brush tool as required to knock down the overexposure a bit in these areas. Don't be afraid of color. Reflections can be fun. I split the image between the actual grasses / reeds and the water, and yes, there is a bird in there somewhere. For this final image, which you may recognize, I have a 20x30 of this in the background of my initial video segment. I have issues with these types of images because I always want to brighten them up. Thankfully, I resisted and am happy with the result. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe, and remember, enjoy life, capture some of it.